Good afternoon. If you happen to be somewhere in New York State or on the east of the United States and Canada, good evening if you're somewhere in Europe, and good morning. Hello to my friends in Australia who I know are listening, and hello all over the world. I'm Fred Plotkin. So this is Fred Plotkin on Fridays, where I have guests who inspire me. That's the common denominator. And while they all have, I can certainly say that, there are few who have inspired me as much as today's guest. I'm going to call you mezzo-soprano, Stephanie Blythe, but you can break out of that barrier any way you want.
Okay.
Stephanie Blythe is a phenomenon. I've heard that described by many people. She is one of our greatest artists. She is known to many people as an opera singer, but she is much more than that. She has boundless gifts that I've been able to benefit from, as have anybody who's aware of her art and her artistry and her creativity and her outlook and her boundary breaking exploration of what it means to be human as expressed through art. Did I define you correctly, Stephanie?
And that was very generous. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank
so I'm just going to start right out with something. You get better and better. And there are not that many people I can say that about. There are many people who have their big splash. They sort of live on repetitions of that splash, whether it's a novelist or an actor who's expected to repeat variations on that, and they get trapped in that. There are wonderful musicians who at the beginning of their career have abundant vocal gifts, but not that many interpretive gifts. And then the interpretive gifts come in and maybe some of the vocal gifts are compromised, or they don't know how to change from what they were to what they are. You get better and better. That's my very informed opinion. You can disagree with me if you'd like, or you can agree with me, but am I onto something?
I don't know if I get better and better. I know that I and I appreciate you saying that. That's very kind. I do think that I'm not afraid of change. And I think that is, for me, I'm not the same singer I was when I first started singing by any stretch of the imagination. I'm a very different singer. And I'm glad, because I'm a different person. I think that I'm not afraid to evolve and to feel comfortable in my own skin, whether it's my vocal skin or my physical skin. And that for me is a very happy place to be. I don't mind that. I don't mind that there are roles that I used to love to sing that I can't sing anymore. I think that's fine. There's always something new on the horizon, and I've discovered a lot of really interesting things and people along the way, and that doesn't seem to be changing. So I'm very happy about that.
Do you think that your evolution, Stephanie, I've already realized that one thing that will be a common denominator in our discussion today will be language and issues of language and word choice and expression, because it's something I grapple with all the time as a writer and as a speaker, that I'm very concerned about using words that chime at the moment, but may not have real meaning. So for example, the verb to drop used to mean that something fell on the floor. Now it means to bring out a new recording of, or drop a book or whatever. I don't use that because this program has an international audience. And maybe in Japan, if I said that I dropped a book, people think that it fell on the floor. Right. So you are a communicator. I think I can say that. And your communication comes with your singing, with your music making, with your instrumental performances, with your ultra sensitive and sophisticated attention to words and language. But I find that your attention to words and language is not precious. It doesn't get in the way. It doesn't say, look at me, I'm using this word, or I'm emphasizing that syllable. it's very natural. And I suppose what I'm remarking on, and you can tell me if you think I'm in the right track, is sort of what you just said, that you're at home in your own skin. And therefore, issues of performance or trendiness are maybe not so important. When I say performance, I mean expected performance.
I think that you know, it's hard enough it's hard enough to live up to your own expectations. To try to live up to everybody else's is kind of ridiculous. I think that the great sin is when you stop having your expectations of yourself, and that's you know, that's something that I think all performers struggle with at one point or another. I think it's very, very important for me. The most important thing about being a performer, and that's what I am. I don't think of myself as an opera singer. I've always wanted to be an entertainer, and that's what I am. And opera is one of the is one of those roads that I've taken for performing, but certainly not the only one. And I think it's just important that as an artist that I try to, you know, sort of lift people in the moment and be reflective of what is happening in the world in the moment, and to maybe comment on that or not. You know, I mean, I think it's a wonderful job. This has been a kind of, I don't know, the pandemic sort of made me take a greater look at my responsibility as an artist. Maybe more so than ever. But I think the idea of communication is paramount for me. And I hope that I'm fairly clear. I hope that I have a message that reaches people. But for me, just being myself is, you know, it's a hard enough job.
But I'm not disagreeing. I'm identifying, actually. Self-knowledge is a slippery thing.
Yeah.
And we, even with the best of intentions and the most self-honesty we can muster, see versions of ourselves that either exaggerate one thing or undervalue another in terms of I'm not good enough to do X, Y, or Z, or I'm really good at this. It's a challenge in a society where you said that you want to address what might be in the moment. I also would assume that because you've sung a lot of opera and you do all kinds of other artistic things, in those fields, you have to plan ahead. You have to book ahead, so to speak. You
Right.
may be engaged for a role 3 years from now, and therefore you study the role.
Not anymore, Fred.
No, but what I mean is one can be engaged. Are you saying, though, that you're just doing?
I'm saying that day that I'm saying that that time is past for all of us.
Yeah.
Being booked 3 years in advance is, you know, maybe some of the larger houses will do stuff like that. The smaller houses will book a year, maybe two in advance, and you don't, because no one, I mean, pre-pandemic, no one can plan that far in advance anymore. No one. And you know what? That's fine. There's
Why do
nothing
you
wrong
think that is, that we can't plan that way anymore?
because you cannot predict who you're going to have in the seats. You can't predict box office. You can't. No one can predict box office. And so you can't, you know, I mean, certainly not even the bigger companies who used to be able to do that. They can't do that anymore. And so you know, I think that you have to take a real read on your audience. And if you're a smaller company and you're putting 4 shows on in a year, let's say, or less, 2 to 4 shows, that's what you're going to get in a smaller company. Booking, you know, 3-4 years in advance doesn't make sense. And so, especially if things change, you book people and contract people that far in advance. If something changes, you're paying out. So there has to be a good balance, and that's fine. You know, I think that where we really need to plan in advance is we need to think about, as artists, we need to think about what we want to be singing 3, 4, 5 years from now, or what we're going to be capable of singing 3, 4, 5 years from now.
But that the life of the artist is already precarious, and she or he, they're looking for work, but also they're looking for inspirational things to do. To be blunt, I created this program more than a year ago, primarily because we were all locked away, and I thought it would bring inspiration to have people like you on, but also I craved it. I was able to create something that I hope was inspiring to others, but frankly, this kind of input, talking to people such as yourself, was and is deeply inspiring to me at a time when I too have been locked away. You know that in the past I've done many things in front of audiences. Can't do that now. And so, yes, I pivoted when the pandemic presented itself, and I hope to pivot again as things change. But I know exactly what you're saying. But I think that I like to dream constructively about things that I would like to do, and they won't all come to pass. But I do think ahead in that regard, even if not everything comes to pass, and just the creative endeavor of thinking and working on them leads me to places that I may not have been before.
Absolutely.
Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. And, you know, if for me now, a lot of the things that I do are projects that are that I start, are projects that I put together. And some of these things take years to do. And that kind of, you know, that kind of planning is something. I have lists of things that I want to do. I keep very, very, very full journals of dream projects, of things that I want to try, or things that that act, quite frankly, projects that I think other people should try. You know, I just for fun, I'll curate concerts for people, and you know, and think about operas that I want to do or would love to have written, things that are, you know, recital topics, cabaret shows, drag shows that I could be doing. You know, there's any number of things. And I think that is, for me, more than anything now, that's what informs my future. I stick that stuff out in the ether and try to manifest it. Mm-hmm. And for the most part, it works.
I, as part of this preparation for talking to you, went into the Met Archives virtually and found everything that you've sung at the Met. And I have heard all of it from the very beginning, from your National Council appearance in 1994, which, for people who don't know, it's kind of like the American Idol for opera. And you were in the finals. And did you win? I assume you did.
Yes.
Okay, good.
I was one of the winners that year. Yeah.
Right. There have been wonderful colleagues of ours who did not win, who did not even arrive there or place there. But a lot of the people who won have gone on to do great things, you being among them. Then you were a voice, not seen, but you were a voice in Parsifal.
Yes.
And I remember thinking, I didn't look in the program. There's certain operas like Don Carlo and Parsifal and Tales of Hoffmann, where we know that there's going to be a voice, but we don't see the singer. And I look forward to those, in Tosca for the Shepherd. And there was this voice, and that was yours. And then you went on and did Berta in the Barber of Seville, which is a sneezing role.
Yes.
Used very comedically.
Sneezing in high seas. It was sneezing. Yeah.
And that's where I found your comic side. And then I'm not going to go through everything because it's comprehensive. But the next thing was you were in that rather notorious production of the Macropolis Case by Janacek that starred Jesse Norman and had Graham Clark and Håkan Haukegaard, Donald McIntyre, and you were a cleaning woman, and Michelle de Young was the chambermaid.
Yes.
And
I was. Let's be specific, though, Fred. I was the charwoman.
Charwoman, okay.
The charwoman. So yes, a cleaning woman, but much more sophisticated.
Okay. But my question from that particular production, which I saw, and I say notorious because sadly, a member of the cast died on opening night a few minutes into the performance. There was a blizzard that prevented another performance. So it had a rough start, that production.
Yes.
But I noticed that in that cast, in addition to Jesse Norman, were Graham Clark, Håkan Haukegaard, and Donald McIntyre.
Yes.
And I have a gut instinct that you were watching and learning from these people, all of whom were super distinguished in their very different ways. One thing that Jesse Norman liked to say that you also exemplify is pigeonholes are for pigeons, that don't categorize me, don't fence me in. But someone like Donald McIntyre, you had already been a voice in Parsifal, and you would go on to sing great Wagner. He was a remarkable Wagnerian, I think, and had a kind of discipline and approach to his artistry. I worked with Håkan Haukegaard a lot, and he was terrific in a very different way. What did you, as a very young artist, begin to recognize and absorb in colleagues such as the ones I just mentioned, or others?
Well, one of the things that was interesting about that show was specifically working with those three men and Richard Vassal,
yes,
who was our colleague that passed away opening night. These were four remarkable voices, incredibly distinctive. I had known Haukegaard's voice for a long time because I had listened to him a lot when I was in college, and I'm a huge fan of all of his leader recordings. I mean, his song output is prodigious, and it just, what an amazing singer. I was always enamored of Donald McIntyre because I thought he was incredibly sexy and with an incredible voice to match, and just one of the kindest people I've ever met. In fact, when Richard died, Donald was the one who went around and actually collected funds from members of the company to help support Richard's daughter, who was quite young. Mm. And he's just an excellent human being. And Graham Clark, one of the funniest, most generous people, with a voice that could cut through cinder blocks. What a voice. Actually, he and Richard were very funny because they both had incredibly high voices that had this very, very specific ping to them that really were like laser beams. And when the two of them sat in the cafeteria and laughed, it was one of the funniest things you've ever heard, because it was just right, it just cut right through your head. Unbelievable. But there was something about all of them as performers that they were so unbelievably 100% committed to the work. And I'll never forget, one day I walked in and I was feeling really annoyed, and I had no right to, because I was a pimple on a flea. Nobody should give a crap what I thought about. But I was annoyed because not all of my colleagues were coming to rehearsal. And it was a really bad winter. And
yes,
sorry, dog. It was a really, really bad winter. And we had schlepped in for a note session, and I must have looked like a rainy day. And Haukegaard looked at me at one point and he went, and I thought, oh, you're right. You're right. This is a great job. This is not the time to be frowning. This is the time to be thankful. You know, Paul Pliszka said that to me once when I came in. I must have had that look on my face in a rehearsal, and I must have been tired. I was a young artist at the time when we did Falstaff together, and Paul looked at me and said, "Kid, you could be sitting behind a desk." And I was like, yes, Mr. Pliszka, you are right. And that, that was the great gift of being a young artist at the Metropolitan Opera during that time, because I got to work with golden age voices and golden age careers that were retiring, people who were coming to the end of their time and who had unbelievable, an incredible richness of experience to share, and they shared it. They were generous, and that was really wonderful. You don't find that all the time now. And I'm sure you didn't find it all the time then. Maybe I got lucky, but there was something about being with these folks that was really remarkable, because we're talking about careers that were long, you know. Somebody who has in opera, somebody who has a 5-year career, usual. 10 years, oh, that's pretty good. 15, wow. You go past 20, that's something. That's really something. And we're talking about 25, 30-year careers here. And that was amazing.
I don't
But
know if you know that Hockegaard, who I admire, I worked with him early in my career. He was one of the first artists that I had contact with at the Met. I worked at La Scala and other places before, but at the Met, he was in some of the first productions that I was involved in. And he's created, again, here we go with language, I'm going to call it a refuge in Sweden for performing artists.
Yes.
It's not an artist colony, but it's kind of like a place to get away and refocus.
Yeah.
And find your footing artistically, emotionally, whatever, which I think is a very smart thing. And I respect him for that too. And it must have come out of his own experience. And therefore, he had the humanity to transfer that to others, which is terrific. Within that run of where you were playing the charwoman, one night you stepped in for our friend and the stupendous, unparalleled Marilyn Horne as Dame Quickly in Falstaff at the Met. Yeah. And James Levine was conducting, and Paul Plishka was the Falstaff, and excellent cast. Barbara Bonney was Nonetta. And talk about that night. You nailed it. I happened to be there.
I've talked a lot about this night in interviews before, but I don't tire of talking about it because it was a very important time for me. Not a lot of people know the backstory of what happened that night, which is kind of interesting. And in that, number one, Ms. Horne had been had recently had double knee replacement surgery, and so because of that, and because it was the winter and it was a bad winter, she missed quite a few rehearsals, and she had done this production at least once before, and so nobody was really worried about that. I was, of course, covering this major part, and was very worried, but because I had to fill in a lot of rehearsals, I worked with the principal cast the whole time. So I had the confidence that came from knowing everybody I was working with and having created a relationship with them in the production. The other thing that was going on was that I was suffering from anxiety disorder at the beginning of a real manifestation of anxiety disorder that had started about a year previous to that. And I that particular day was having a major meltdown. I mean, a huge meltdown. And I had been trying to deal with having anxiety and panic attacks all on my own. It never happened to me at work. It was a life thing. And I had been attending, I would go to every single performance because I thought, I'm going to watch Marilyn Horne perform. I'm going to be there. I want to see this. And that particular night, I wasn't going to go. I was having such a bad day. I could not shut off my brain. I was just in constant panic, and so I had a lesson. Just I'd finished my coachings at work, went to my lesson, sat on my teacher's couch and cried. And she just looked at me and said, I love you so much and I want to help you, but I can't. I don't have the wherewithal to do it, but here's the name of somebody who can. So I called her on the phone and I left a message, and I just sat there and took a breath for the first time in maybe 2 weeks. And 5 minutes after that, I got a call from the Met saying Marilyn Horne had canceled and I was going on. And I felt like it was serendipity. I felt that, that this was clearly a message I was being sent, that I had made the right decision, and that, I was going to be okay. And I was okay. I got in a cab. I went straight to the Met. All I could do was remember, was look down at my hands and say, I've got red nail polish on. I got to take that off. I knew what I needed to do. I'd done all the rehearsals. Levine came into my room and he sat down with me and he said, what do you need from me? I said, I think I'll be all right. He said, I think you will too. And I went on. I remember every second of that performance. I have done more Falstaffs in my career than any other role. I've done that Met Falstaff, the Zeffirelli Falstaff, I did 3 times. I did the new Falstaff. The Falstaff has introduced me to every major house in which I've sung. And I remember that one more than any other. The very first.
The Zeffirelli or the new Robert Carson?
I'm sorry?
You remember that evening, that first night?
I remember that first night.
Okay.
I remember that first night. Yeah, absolutely. The Carson, I can take or leave. The Zeffirelli, that was something.
Yeah.
That was something. That production, that cast, not to say, and not to denigrate anyone I've worked with since. Paul Pliszka is the best Falstaff I've ever sung with, and it was the last one he did.
Yeah.
And he I've sung with a gazillion Falstaffs, and they're all wonderful. They all have something that makes them special, all of them. Paul, I don't know if it was by virtue of the fact that he was the first Falstaff I'd ever seen, or that I knew that he had this unbelievable history, this fantastic. Paul was a mentor. He taught me about this business. Paul and a load of other phenomenal character singers at the Met, like Tony Latura and Bernard Fitch and James Courtney, people that I worked with for many, many years. Jane Shawless, they taught me more about this industry and singing than just about anybody. And Paul, the level of generosity, and the fact that man could sing Falstaff one night and then go 2 nights later and sing, the Doge in Otello, which is a tiny part, and give them both an unbelievable amount of gravitas. That says something about him as an artist.
Or the Landlord in Bohème, which is priceless. So as you always do, Stephanie, you in 1 3-minute oration have triggered about 50 thoughts in my head. So I'm going to pick a couple of them. One of them is, I think that one of my main teachers, and I actually studied with him, was Tito Gobi.
Yeah.
And part of what made Tito extraordinary, he was a great Falstaff, is that he did his own makeup. He was a wonderful caricaturist, and he would draw the characters and the gestures and the nose on a certain character and the atteggiamento, the movement.
Exactly.
And then he did his own makeup. And I know that you have done for many, many years your own makeup.
Yeah.
Where did you learn that? Because people should know that often at the Met and other theaters, there are makeup artists who come in and make up the singer. Yeah. You do your own.
I've been doing my own makeup since 2001. 2000. I'm not at the Met. I started doing my own makeup at Seattle Opera. The second time I did, we did, I think it was 2000 or 2001, when I was doing Fricka there, and I started doing my own makeup there. I learned to do makeup from Stephen Horak, who was the person who did my makeup at the Met for many, many years. And when I worked at the Met, Stephen was always the one who did my makeup until he retired. And then after that happened, I did it, and I've done it ever since. And I do my own makeup for one very specific reason. I am a total control freak. And when I'm looking at somebody do my makeup, I don't want to constantly go, could you do a little more to this? Could you? It's a waste of time for me and for everybody else. And also it gives me time to kind of focus And that time just before you go onto stage is really sacrosanct for me. And this is part of my, you know, we all have our patterns that we follow, and things that are sort of, I wouldn't call it a superstition, but it's sort of a superstition.
Mhm.
I just need to have that. I need to have that time. And I can make it whatever I want. If I want to play music, fine. If I don't, fine. If I want to play bird sounds, I can do that. If I want total silence, I don't want anybody in the room, I can do that. But the point is that I have the quality control at that moment, because the minute that I leave and I stand on the stage, it's no longer about me. It's about everybody else around me.
So a couple of makeup questions. One is, you design your own makeup, so to speak, or are you following a blueprint that has been given by the team on a production? Because, for example, let's take a character, Yezi Baba, that you sang in Rusalka,
Right.
who's sort of a, I wouldn't call her a witchy character, but she has other powers,
Right.
and she often has particular makeup.
Right.
Would a production team say to you, this is how the makeup should be, and you put it on yourself, or do you design your own?
No, I will take direction from whatever. I mean, that when I did Yeji Baba, actually, Stephen was still working, and I actually my favorite story coming out of that makeup chair was that one night I was so hot after doing all my scenes at the end of the show. I just wanted to get out of my eyebrows so fast, because I had these giant eyebrows that were glued on, and I just like whipped it right off, tore half of my eyebrow, never came back. So it's meticulous eyebrowing now. No, I will get notes from the production team, and they'll let me know what they want it to look like. But in general, you know, I mean, I'm a fairly creative person, and people are generally happy with what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And if I do, and the thing is that we're not allowed, I mean, in some cases, we're not allowed to do real character. I mean, Tito Gobi would never be able to do now what he did.
Yes, I was going to say that his rule was he designs his makeup and you light him according to the makeup that he has created, rather
Right.
than the other way around.
Right. But now with filming, you can't do that kind of makeup.
Well,
You know, I mean,
actually, in the past at the Met, and when I say in the past, I mean the 80s when I worked there,
yeah.
the makeup was a lot heavier than it is now,
Yeah.
in part because
Absolutely.
they did TV. Well, there was stage makeup, but then there was TV as opposed to HD cinemas with more
Right.
refined cameras. And some of the people looked like they were from horror films, even if they were just playing girlfriend roles.
Yeah.
And so there was that. Um, I don't play characters. I don't perform that way, but I appear in front of the public and often on television, whatever, and am required to wear makeup.
Mhm.
And many, many years ago, I did an appearance in which there was a makeup artist who made me up. And apparently the sponges that she was using had touched someone who had some kind of skin infection.
Yeah.
And I was given impetigo, and for 30 days and more, it was like Phantom of the Opera, that I had
Yeah.
a mask over half my face. And a colleague said to me, she said, I can't believe you don't carry your own pads and everything and your own brushes and equipment.
Right.
And now I do. But now,
Yeah.
frankly, I also carry my own makeup because I don't want them dipping my brushes into someone
Sure.
else's. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was a lesson, because I lost work because I couldn't go out because my face was entirely inflamed and a
I'm
mess.
so sorry that happened.
Yeah. So it was a lot. We learned. It was just kind of like, and I've written about this. I was appearing at the Mariinsky in St. Petersburg, and they had just had a rehearsal of a ballet sequence on the stage that they used some kind of substance to create fog or clouds, whatever.
Mhm.
And I was in very good voice. And then I went on to appear, and I had no voice like that. I had nothing. It just vanished.
Yeah.
And I asked the stage manager what's going on. He said, well, this happens a lot. We don't know why. So I contacted my throat doctor in New York, and I explained what was going on. And he said, yes, in Russia, they use these substances for atmospheric effects, but
Yeah.
it's lethal on the voice. So I had to learn to advise ahead of time. If you're rehearsing ballet on the stage or have any special effects,
Yeah.
I'm not appearing on your stage. And that
Yeah.
can sound difficult, but it's our livelihoods.
Sure. Absolutely.
And I had to get a shot and I had to be in vocal silence for 2 weeks. And it was not pretty. How have you and how do you negotiate all of that, especially in a world where designers and scenic effects and such are now much more complex, and we often pay the price? You singer, me speaker.
Well, I would love to discuss that, but in all honesty, I need a 2-minute break.
Okay,
Can you talk for 2 minutes?
I can
And
talk
I'll
for
be
2 minutes.
back. Okay.
This is what I do.
All right. I figured you could. I'll be right back.
Okay, thank you. So you may have seen Stephanie has a lovely dog named June who snuggled into the scene. Stephanie has many, many talents beyond what we know her for her singing that I plan to talk to her about. As you know, I always ask my guests to give music that appears in the IDAGIO catalog that inspires them. And I couldn't wait to see what Stephanie gave. You would expect perhaps that she would have a Marilyn Horne performance or Handel or Wagner or whatever. None of the above. Everything was in the world of jazz, but that's a very broad term. Antonio Carlos Jobim, music, the Brazilian composer and performer from 1967, a rather complex piece called Wave with cello, double bass, guitar, lots of percussion and piano. Then she has a pianist I did not know, keyboard player. She also plays harpsichord, named Monica Gaylord, who was born in New York but moved to Canada early and is a Canadian. We in America would say African American. I think we can say a person of African descent who is a Canadian, playing a piece by Oscar Peterson. If you don't know Oscar Peterson, great Canadian of African descent, grew up in Montreal, one of the greatest pianists ever. Duke Ellington called him the Maharaja of the keyboard. He often performed with Ella Fitzgerald, and they were a magical combination, was Oscar Peterson and Ella Fitzgerald. If you just want to hear the potential for a pianist, yes, we listen to recordings by Rachmaninoff with his huge extension of his hands, but someone of similar gifts in the jazz realm, but really anything he played, was Oscar Peterson. And then Stephanie selected a piece performed by Chet Baker. Chet Baker was a very famous musician, jazz musician, although I avoid terms that confine, who was a troubled person. He had drug issues and he died in Amsterdam, falling out of a window. We don't think he committed suicide, in a hotel. And I want to commend you a book called Deep in a Dream, The Long Night of Chet Baker, which was written by James Gavin, a wonderful biographer who's also done Peggy Lee and Lena Horne, and is working on a book now, I won't reveal it, of a magnificent musician. And his real specialty is writing books about musicians who are very complex and genius-like. So hi, Stephanie.
Hello.
So while you were away, I spoke about June, your beautiful
yeah.
dog. And then I described your musical selections by Jobim and Oscar Peterson, Monica Gaylord, Chet Baker. I didn't get to the last one, and spoke about what these are. And I know the people on IDAGIO will visit that. So you said you had an answer about how to negotiate the thickets of going to theaters and performing spaces and dealing with issues that could affect our health. Right.
Well, one of the ways that I deal with that is I drink a lot of water, which is why I needed so much time. Sorry. Very important to hydrate. One of the big problems about being a performer when you were involved in an industry that there's so many people involved, right? Is that we have very little control over production. In fact, most of us have no control over production whatsoever. So when productions are being designed, there's no one there to advocate for the people who are actually going to be working on it. And that's just the truth. It's an ugly piece of truth, but it's true. Because if someone had asked me, the new bent ring would look a lot different than it does.
Yeah.
But they didn't ask me, and that's okay. It's all right. There's something for everyone in opera. But we don't have a lot of control. And so there's certain things that we sort of have to trust that the powers that be are keeping us in mind, and do our very best to make sure that whenever we're on stage, we are very aware of everything that's going on around us. And this is a skill set that does not exist much anymore. Because a lot of times when the stage is one of the most dangerous places you can be. Because anything can happen, anything. And if you are not paying attention, you are putting yourself and other people in a lot of danger. I've fallen into an open trap door, at Covent Garden. That was terrifying. I took a real decent fall there. I just about killed one of my colleagues who was coming up in the trap. Thank God she saw me coming.
What was the opera?
Falstaff. But it's a dangerous place.
Yeah.
Now there's a sign. Now there's a digital running sign, off sides that says open trap door. I happen to be working on a set where there were 6 open trap doors, and it was dark.
Yeah.
So, and I have to say, my amazing colleague and friend, Bryn Tervel, who was singing Falstaff, he reached out to grab me. God, he almost got my costume. Had he gotten it, I would have fallen, but hit my head on the edge of the stage. So I'm glad that it happened the way it did. And, nothing was really hurt but my pride and my butt, which are both, which are one and the same. But there's a lot of things that can happen, and you have to be aware. But when you live in a world where people walk around looking at a cell phone instead of looking at their environment, this is something that we've now it's now sort of ingrained in us as a society. But when you're on stage and you're doing a production, you have to be aware.
We have had colleagues be seriously injured. Well, Richard Versailles, he had a heart attack and died, but
right.
As I recall, he was on a ladder and came to the ground and died. But that was different from people having real accidents. And I've seen them. I, as manager at the Met years ago, had to deal with the injuries. In the 1980s, when we did Porgy and Bess, the Gershwins put a live goat in the opera. And that goat created a lot of trouble because, number one, its droppings were slippery and people would fall. Another night, the goat basically gored one of the cast members, and he was very seriously injured.
That's terrible.
And why I remember telling the production, get a goat that doesn't have horns, please. Because
just leave out the goat.
Leave out the goat. Well,
just leave out the goat.
I suppose leave it out physically, but I think it has to be mentioned because part of the pathos to me is that poor, innocent, trusting Porgy believes that he can leave poor South Carolina, Catfish Row, and take a goat cart and get 1,000 miles to New York City and find Bess. And so when he says, bring me my goat, it's very sad, especially.
I get it. I get that it's literally in there. And I've done a lot of shows with animals, a lot of Falstaffs actually, but I've done a lot of shows with animals, and they're very unpredictable.
I know. I mean, the Robert Carson production has a horse, and I've seen that production in New York, London, and Milan. And the horses all behave
Right.
differently in each one. Were you in the
You're
Carson?
talking about the 3-1 thing, right?
Yes, yes.
Are you talking
Mondo
about
Reo, where
the top of
Falstaff,
the third act? Yeah.
he's been thrown out into the laundry back into the Thames,
Right.
and
Right.
Mondo Reo, Ugly
Right.
World, and the only being
Yeah.
he has to talk to is a horse, and it is very
Right.
funny. And the British horse was very interactive, whereas the American horse
Yeah.
was a little more tranquil. Did you have
Well,
any?
everyone knows, Fred, that scene is about a horse.
Yeah,
That's the most important thing. It's
yeah,
about a horse, right? It's not about a man who is actually, for the first time in his life, being reflective and seeing something very important about himself and making this realization, and then all of a sudden that disappearing with a big cup of ale. It's about a horse. It's about costumes. It's about props. But God forbid it be about the story, what's actually written. So sorry.
so Stephanie,
Apologies.
you broke up after you said it's
Oh,
about a horse, it's about props. Then you said apologies.
am
So
I
I lost a
am I
minute.
back?
Yes, you're back.
Am I back?
Yes,
I'm
you're
back. You missed all the good stuff.
I heard
I
it's
said,
about a horse, about props, apologies.
God forbid it should be about the story.
Okay. I hear
God
you.
forbid it
Okay.
should tell the story.
I
God
know.
forbid, with all due respect, it should certainly be about how it looks.
I hear you.
Because the look is what has made it last. I mean, Falstaff is an enduring classic because of how it looks.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So another whole area I want to go to with you that you've hinted at a bit, and I've discussed openly now, is words. And
Right.
you very famously 6 years ago did a wonderful recital at Carnegie Hall that not only did I attend, I don't write reviews, but I wrote about the experience, and it created more reader comment than I think any article I've ever published. And I read through all the comments again last night because it's been 6 years.
Right.
Basically, what you did with Warren Jones, wonderful collaborator, you did a concert of Poulenc, Leo Ferré, Jacques Brel, Benjamin Britten, and Noel Coward.
Right.
And you said that audiences who read with their heads down and noses in the text don't actively hear the recital. They don't take part in it. I would love to have the audiences give me the information in their faces. And number one, talk about what you meant. And then the second question will be, have your feelings changed, or are they more resolved than ever in that direction?
They're more resolved than ever. And in fact, now that I'm a teacher, I teach the same thing. And I have had more wonderful young artists write to me from various conservatories to tell me that this is what they're doing in their own recitals because of being introduced to it that way, which thrills me no end. It's wonderful. It's interesting when you wrote that article because I read a lot of those comments, and it was fascinating to me that there were actually people who wrote, that I was saying that because I was egotistical, that I wanted people to be looking at me. And man, if you think that that's what it's about, God help you. Really? You need to be looking. This is about human beings in the same space sharing an experience together. And people who are looking at one another share an experience simply by virtue of the eyes. If you are feeling something about something that I am saying or singing, I can see it. And if that happens, it changes the way that I perform. It makes my need for you to understand even greater. And it makes the experience real and honest. It makes it an exchange. We're not listening. You're not popping on a record and listening. You're in a space with a performer. And so that's one of the great joys of being a live performer, is that you have this energy that feeds you and that you feed. It's a beautiful mutual experience, or it should be, and it's an active experience rather than a passive one. And I feel as you can tell, I feel very strongly about it. And the thing that I loved about that concert was not only, I mean, I was singing music on that concert that was important to me for many, many reasons. One of which was that my mother was a huge fan of Brel, and to sing Brel on a concert, you know, and also to bring Léo Ferré, probably, I believe I was probably the first person to sing Léo Ferré on that stage.
Mm-hmm.
And to sing his music and to go to the text first, as he most certainly did, as someone who set so much beautiful poetry. It was important. And to hear Warren Jones reciting a translation of Ne me quitte pas, and to hear him say over and over again, "Don't leave me, don't leave me," emotionally, it was electrifying. And to hear him say that, and to watch the audience hearing it, to watch the audience reacting to that, to hearing the pianist, who normally is only seen in the periphery, all right, whose voice we never hear, to hear the audience reacting to that. He got spontaneous applause every venue we performed, every single time, because it was so powerful and beautiful. And it made the performance better. It made the audience connect better because they already had a feeling about the piece, and they didn't have to look at the translation in the program in order to connect to the text. They already had. And so in reciting the text, it gives the audience an opportunity to have a feeling, to have a reaction to the text that is singular to them. And then they get to see and hear how we react to the text and how the composer reacted to the text. It becomes so multi-layered and so much more interesting and personal. And I've said many times, the reason I started doing it was because I had students doing it at Tanglewood, doing this Baudelaire concert, where I had given them all Baudelaire poetry set by 9 different composers. And each of them recited, each of the singers had another singer reciting the text before they would, in translation, before they would sing it. And the great Phyllis Curtin was sitting in the audience and listening. And the person sitting next to her, when she heard the poem, Les Morts des Amants, she sat there and she went, "Oh, how creepy." And I thought, how wonderful that she is going to hear this song after having that reaction. And so that's, pardon me, that's what it's all about. It's not about me needing people to look at me while I'm singing. It's about me needing to see. It's about me wanting to share in a moment with someone. And that's how you get it.
So I'm going to pull out a few of the comments. I didn't write them down, but I remember them, that I felt are worth talking about. Yes, you're right that a lot of the comments were supportive, but many that were not supportive were incredibly angry.
Oh, yeah.
Many at you and at Warren, a couple at me. One of them said, well, you know, Fred Plotkin can go to a Stephanie Blythe concert because he knows music and he knows this and that, but most people don't. And I understand that, yes, it's part of my profession to know this. But I feel that artists of your stature and Warren's stature can communicate in different means. One thing that a person did say that I think is worth commenting on is Carnegie Hall has 2,800 seats. And it happens that my subscription is the 5th row on the aisle, so that I was right there with you, so to speak. But if someone is in the upper balcony,
Right,
they don't necessarily hear the lyrics being recited. I should say to listeners now that what you and Warren did was recite the lyrics before singing, performing the songs, so that the the audience would have a context for it. But they said that they felt very removed all the way up there from this recitation, especially they didn't necessarily hear Warren. Do you have a feeling that maybe in a small hall it works better than a big hall?
First of all, we didn't try to do that without rehearsing it. And we had people standing in every area of that theater to listen, because they wanted to do it with microphones and I refused to do it with microphones. Mm-hmm. That hall was designed to be spoken in. People gave great orators spoke in that theater and were heard without microphones. And so I'm sure there were people who may not have had the same experience as everyone else. That is the way it is in the theater. And we're always going to, people are always going to have disparate experiences. Also, I need to point out that no one walked out of that theater without having the text. Mm-hmm. The text was offered to everyone, but not at the beginning.
The printed text, yes.
Printed text was offered at the end. Mm-hmm. And that's what I always do. There's always printed text. So that if you want to, really look at it and study it, you can after the fact. I'm very sorry if there were people who did not have the same experience because they didn't hear as well. But I also think that we're not trained to listen anymore. People don't listen.
We're going to go there in 1 second on that topic. But the other point that some people raised is that Marilyn Horne, who is a great advocate for the vocal recital with her mm-hmm. foundation and for decades has been the advocate for it, believes that having projected titles above the singer and the pianist is an effective way so that the audience is looking toward the stage and not down, but at the same time can read translations if they wish.
Right.
How do you feel about that?
I disagree. I think it's a terrible idea. But someone may say exactly the same about what I do. Mm-hmm. For me, I don't want to have, if I'm doing a recital, I don't want projected text, because we're talking about a completely different thing than opera, completely different. Because in opera, if you have projected text, there's a load of stuff going on that stage, and also a lot less text. And the last thing I want is for the audience to be measuring along what I'm singing. I don't like super titles in opera, quite frankly.
Nor do I.
If I'm standing on the stage and taking my patoot off and I look at this, that doesn't feel too hot either. I think it's important that we listen, and not just listen with our, it isn't just about, this is going to sound so esoteric and, maybe stupid, but it isn't just about what words mean. It's about how things sound. It's about how text sounds in conjecture with music. And I just think that hearing text and hearing it spoken, we don't get that anymore. We don't get recitation. People don't do it. And there's a reason. Look at all the hits that Patrick Stewart got on Instagram and Twitter over the pandemic, sitting and reading a sonnet a day of Shakespeare's sonnets. He read all of the sonnets, one every day. And he had an enormous amount of people following him while he did this, yours truly included. Mm-hmm. We don't listen to recitation. We don't listen to, and I think it's a skill we need to develop again. We need to learn how to listen.
I had the NPR journalist on recently, Michelle Martin, at the beginning of this month. And she's a wonderful interviewer, in part because she's a wonderful listener. Mm-hmm. And I told her about a course that I've taught for decades that I created called The Art of Listening, and the difference between hearing and listening. And you made the point very well. You also mentioned something that I've been teaching since at least 1993 and probably before, that when a composer writes music to a text, whether it's an opera libretto or a poem, he or she is responding not only to the meaning of the words, but the sound of the words.
Yeah.
And that the music that the composer creates relates also to the sound of the words, which is very important. So that when you teach artists about singing in French as opposed to German, and where the accent, just in those two languages, where the accents and the emphases land, it's distinctive. To which I'm going to add that you said something 6 years ago regarding this recital that really has stuck in my head for years, and I focus on it all the time. The program in the first half was French language repertory. In the second half, it was English language repertory. The Benjamin Britten was based on poetry. The Noel Coward was based on lyrics. And I never quite thought before about the difference, although it's obvious to me now, between poetry and lyrics. So that therefore you and Warren recited the poetry that Britten composed to, but you did not recite the lyrics that Noel Coward created for his own songs. Why was that?
Well, one of the major reasons we did it is that a lot of that music had a lot of his songs have a twist in them, and they're funny. And it's like, I didn't want to preempt that. You don't want to hear the lyric. I don't want to recite the lyrics to Nina from Argentina, because it's important that the audience follows along in that story and is surprised by it. And so those, I don't think that you have to recite Mad About the Boy. It does, and it's not because I don't think that lyrics are poetry. That's not it at all. It isn't. I'm not making any kind of equivalence there. I'm really saying that the lyrics in this particular case, it was important not to reveal things too soon. Otherwise, the song wouldn't land the same way.
I fully agree. I'm putting this out for our listeners because I know that they don't necessarily think about that. And as they think more about what happens in a performance, Stephanie, you've been giving us a lot of insights to things that I know people don't think about, both in terms of the scenery and cancellations and all of that. I just want to mention one more thing about cancellation before I move to the next topic. That is, Marilyn Horne was not much of a canceller. She was a very reliable artist, but occasionally she had to. And one time when I worked at the Met, she, in the middle of a performance, had some reaction to a medication, and she lost her ability to really produce the sound she wanted to produce. So she withdrew, and she called me, and I had to bring in the cover, the standby, the understudy, and Marilyn didn't know who this was and wanted to talk to her, and this person was very nervous. And the artist said, "Well, I'm afraid to." And Marilyn said, "Okay." And she took out her lipstick and wrote her a message on the mirror in the dressing room of encouragement. And she said, "Fred, make sure that when this girl," as she described her, "when this girl comes in, that she sits down and looks in the mirror." And she did, and all of the encouragement and love and support that Marilyn Horne could give was right there. Yeah. And I said, "What if you didn't have lipstick?" She said, "I do my own makeup too." That's what brings me back to.
Like, this is, one of the great experiences that I was able to have at the very beginning of my career was an exposure to Marilyn Horne. And it came immediately with the National Council, because I remember one of my favorite stories was after I was singing in the first half of this was during the actual competition. And the way they did the competition back then is different than the way they do it now. So we all competed, and then they chose winners, and then 2 weeks later we did a concert. And so I had already gone, and then I was in my dressing room and I fell asleep. As I was stressed out, I just passed out. And then I woke up about 20 minutes later, and I freshen myself up, and I went to sit out in the theater with my friend Maggie Lattimore, who had just won the previous year. And she said, come and sit next to me. I'm sitting with Marilyn Horne. And I thought, holy shit, this is incredible. And so, you know, Marilyn comes back and she sits down next to Maggie, and she leans over and she introduces herself. And I just looked at her. I said, oh my God, that's all I could say. And Maggie said, just say hello, Stephanie. And Marilyn showed me her program. And next to my name, she had put 3 stars. And I thought, I looked at her and I said, well, that's all that matters. Marilyn Horne picked me. That's all I care about. And when the whole thing was over, I was out in the lobby, and Marilyn came up to me and she said, you know, Stephanie, there are no, you know, we can't predict anything. But she said, if you're not a winner today, I'll eat my coat. And she was wearing this big, you know, black fur coat. So if you don't win, I'm going to eat my coat. And I said, Ms. Horne, if I don't win this, I'm coming after you with a knife and fork. I don't know where I got the balls to say that to Marilyn Horne, but after that happened, I covered Marilyn. When I joined the Young Artist Program, I covered her twice in 2 years. First as Samira in Ghost of Versailles, and then as Dame Quickly. And so we were, and then I was involved in her song, in The Song Continues. Mm-hmm. And she presented me in recital. And so we saw each other a lot. And the thing that was always amazing, and is still amazing, is that for her, you know, giving back is it was a no-brainer. One of the most supportive, generous colleagues I have ever met. And someone who always made you feel like you could, you know, that what you were doing was important. And I've tried to emulate that in my own career to try to give back as much as I possibly can. And I was very, very fortunate to be exposed to her and so many other amazing artists very early on in my career, most of whom are not singing anymore. But because of that, they gave me this wealth of information from their own experience. And she was certainly, you know, at the very top of that list.
I mean, we could devote hours to, maybe one night you and I will just sit down and pour something and talk about Marilyn before an audience. Sure. I don't know if you know about her, that I had a wonderful assistant at the Met who I hired and trained. It gave her first job. She was 21. And I recognized a lot of talents. And I'm making a really long story short. Marilyn hired her away from me and took me out to the best, most drunken lunch I've ever had at a very fine French restaurant in New York. And she thanked me for training. Alessandra is her name, and what a fine, young, secure woman Alessandra had become, and able and intelligent, everything that she was then and still is. And I said, you know, Marilyn, did you ever think of hiring me to be your assistant? I love you, and I have the goods too. And she said, no, because you're a boy. And I said, well, what does that have to do with it? And she said, well, you know, you'd see me in my underwear. I don't want to have you see me in my underwear. And I said, okay, I understand. And about an hour and 2 bottles later, I said to her, so Marilyn, is there any circumstance under which you wouldn't have Alessandra be your assistant? And she said, well, yes, if the good Lord Jesus Christ came along and wanted to be my assistant, I'd take him. And I said, but Marilyn, he's a boy. She said, I know, but he's the son of God.
Yeah.
She has done so many remarkable things for so many people in our field. And sure just not in our field, but also in the public domain, a lot of which is not known. And yes. It's a gift that we were able to learn from her. I'm going to pivot a little bit because of something just I've been thinking about. You know that before I worked at the Met, I worked at La Scala in the 1970s. Yeah. And my mentor, my teacher, I was the assistant to Giorgio Strehler, the stage director. But I loved him, but he was very fiery and different temperament from mine, and brilliant, and I love what I learned from him. But the two figures at La Scala that I most closely identify with and saw as models were the conductor Claudio Botto and the ballerina, and I'm not into ballet really, but the ballerina Carla Fracci, who died 2 days ago. And I've been thinking about Fracci in that I mean, I like dance, but it's not my thing, communicated dance to me, but she understood that what was important that she communicate to me was La Scala. Not that it's fancy, but its traditions and its values. And that she began in 1946 as a student, and she last taught there in January of this year, 75 years at that theater. And she knew Callas and Visconti and Vittorio Gui and all the people that we know and think of for La Scala. And it was her notion that she instilled in me that history and heritage, because she called herself a testimone, a witness. That
Right.
she was the witness, and I had to be the witness to what she communicated. It was not just about these famous people. It was about specifically the makeup and costume people.
Yeah.
That she had so much to say and what they did and what their artistry was and so on. So that I see it as part of my job to send this along. I see that in you too, that you do this. You were, as you said, very fortunate early on to have the Donald McIntyres and Graham Clarks and Hoggegaards and Marilyn Hornes and all these people. At what point did you begin to turn it around and start passing it on?
Well, I had always, I think probably when I first started being asked to do master classes, that would probably be, that's probably when it first started for me, which is maybe about 15 years ago. And when I started teaching at Tanglewood, I had been a fellow at Tanglewood for 2 summers, and they were life-changing for me.
Mm-hmm.
What made me realize I really wanted to sing, and gave me a passion for art song and for communication and for text, and introduced me to some of my most important mentors. And then when I started Fall Island Vocal Arts Seminar, which was a program that we, up until the pandemic, we did every summer, which is devoted to American song, American composers, living American composers. Mm-hmm. But I think it probably, before it was something that was something that I did in an institutional way, it was something that I tried to do and to emulate because of my mentors in the industry. My friend Charles Anthony, who I'm sure you remember with great fondness. So, I mean, sure. Charlie was one of the greatest singers, one of the greatest human beings, one of the greatest artists I've ever known, who sang at the Metropolitan Opera longer than anyone in history, who had more performances than anyone in history. Charlie said to me very early on, we were sitting together in the cafeteria, and he said, "Kid, you can be an artist, you can be part of the machine. What do you want?" And I knew what Charlie wanted from me. I knew he wanted me to be an artist. I knew he wanted me to think about why it is what we do, and how we contribute to it. What is it that we bring as individuals to the art form? And I wanted to be like him. I wanted to be somebody who would be reliable, who would be generous, would be somebody that the colleagues would look toward for support. And I think that's where all that first started with me, with Charlie Anthony.
So I'll tell listeners more about Charles Anthony. Don't ask me why I know this, but he made his Met debut in 1954. And he, indeed, as you said, sang more performances at the Met than any other artist. He was a tenor, and he was from New Orleans, and his full name was Charles Anthony Caruso.
Right.
And when he came to the Met, Rudolph Bing, then general manager, said to Anthony, "We've already had one Caruso. We can't have another. So you'll have to be Charles Anthony." And that's how he dropped the name Caruso.
Right.
He did some leading roles, but mostly character tenor roles beautifully. Uh, whether it was the idiot in Boris Godunov or the old emperor in Turandot, just everything. And he was always vivid, but never scene stealing. But he brought what he had to the character, the schemer in Andrea Chenier. What did you sing with him at all? Were you in Andrea Chenier with him?
I was in Chenier with him. He was in my stage debut. He was the lead officer in Barbara Seville.
Okay.
Who comes in at the end of the first act.
That's right.
Oh no, Charlie and I sang together a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But what was the one I remember the most was the last. I was doing the old production of Ballo and Maschera, making my debut in the Met as Ulrica. And he was the servant who came at the end of he came to announce the Sopranos entrance. The character I can't remember to save my life right now, Lenora.
Yeah.
Is that her name? Yes.
Lenora.
Yeah.
No, Amelia. Amelia.
That's it.
Michelle Kreider. Amelia.
It was Michelle Kreider, exactly.
Yeah.
And we were rehearsing, and he came up to me and he said, Stephanie, my first Ulrica was Marian Anderson, and you were my last.
Silencio.
And I will never forget that.
Marian Anderson.
I'll never forget it. It was the
You know me in dates. January 7th, 1955, Marian Anderson was the first Black artist to sing a leading role at the Met. And Mr. Bing brought her in part to help try to break that barrier, which was broken more by Leontine Price, Barry Grist, Grace Bunbury, Shirley Verrett, Martina Arroyo, and others. But it was really Anderson back in 1955 to do that. Just as schools...
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, just as schools in America had just been desegregated a few months before.
Right.
And we were in the medieval times in terms of race relations. We're not done yet. We have so much more to do. But it's hard to think that at that time, Black children were separated. I mean, just everything. And so for Mr. Bing, not an easy figure, but he understood that this was the right thing to do, and he brought her in. So Charles Anthony was a witness.
Yes, he was.
And a torch passer.
Yeah. And the other thing that we don't talk a lot about when we talk about Anderson doing that Ulrica, it was also her operatic debut.
Yeah.
She had never been in an opera before, so that was enormous. But for Charlie to say that to me, and to that, I just will never forget it. It was so beautiful, and it was such a reminder of where we have to constantly be aware of the ancestry. It's important. It's important for us to know our history.
Yeah.
And that was quite something.
So I mentioned Andrea Chenier, and I bring it up because, number one, it's one of my very favorite operas. It's undervalued, but I think it's in my top 5, certainly, by Umberto Giordano. You know that I was a very close friend and colleague of Luciano Pavarotti for 29 years, and he was taking on this role. He knew that I loved it, and therefore we spoke endlessly about this particular character.
Yeah.
You played a character who was known as La Vecchia, the old Madelon. Mm-hmm. And you were a grandmother who was giving away your last grandchild to the cause of the French Revolution.
Right.
And your scene is about 5 minutes at most. And customarily, it stops the show, and you did, in the good sense of stop the show. And customarily it's gone to a veteran, older artist, often Italian. There's one now named Elena Zilio, who's, I don't know how old she is, but she does it beautifully. And Fedora Barbieri did it. And so you were the first young vecchio madalone that I'd ever come across. And I took my father, and you should know that my dad and I were extremely close. He was a musician. Most of my musical foundations came from him. You would have loved him because he did everything from classical to jazz to everything. To him, we had the policy in the house, the Duke Ellington rule, it was called. There's good music and there's the other kind. And
Right.
Dad didn't know Andrea Chenier, and he knew that I loved it. And I knew that my father was ill and dying. He did not know. And I took him to this. Luciano knew that it would probably be my dad's last opera. It was. And he said to me about you in his typical New York accent, "That's some singer." Because, I mean, yes, we know your gifts as a singer, but you were taking on a role that is typically done at a different point in the career from when you were doing it. And I watched it again the other night, and you were youthful looking, even with makeup and wigs and such.
Yeah, I was like a baby.
How did you approach that when basically you look 3 years older than the boy you were giving away?
Well, that's kind. Zach, what was really lovely is that when Chenier played a few weeks ago, Zach, the now grown man who's a director for TV, actually wrote to me on Instagram and connected with me. That was absolutely lovely. He was so dark. And that was what was interesting about that was that that was the second time that production was being done in 2 years. So it had been done the previous season with Larissa Diadkova singing the role, and Prive Millo singing with Luciano. And it was amazing to be there and to cover that. And so I was studying somebody who, had serious chops. Diadkova was a wonderful singer.
Yeah.
And a terrific actress. And so that was I was really fortunate to have that experience first. I've played loads of women that I'm not over my life, and ages that I am not over the course of my life, and maybe someday I'll sing Madelon again. It's just about leading with text and about emotion. I mean, I've never, I don't know. You'd have to be dead not to be moved by that scene, and not to try to connect with it. You'd have to be dead. It is so well written. It is so poignant. It is so distilled. That moment is so distilled that it wasn't difficult at all. Although I do remember being asked by a member of the administration if I could possibly look more blind. And I said, short of you giving me a dog or a stick, I don't think so. I didn't know what to say. I'm trying. But it was a great, I'll tell you what really turned me on about doing that show. Was obviously singing on the same stage with Pavarotti, which was, we didn't share any scenes, but being in the same show with him was amazing. But Juan Pons, someone that I had just, crushed on for years. I got to sing several shows with Juan, and what an amazing colleague, and what a terrific voice. And just, that was really something. And getting to work this was the second time I had sung with Hulagina. I'd also been on tour with the Met, playing Mama Lucia and Cavalleria with her.
In Japan.
What an extraordinary human being. I mean, just larger than life. And then we ended up actually doing this together, and we did Tritico together as well. And I will never forget.
Was she Giorgetta in Tritico?
Yeah. And it was wonderful. We had a terrific connection during that show. We had a terrific connection. She was
I
One,
know
I
her a
mean,
bit, and I know her daughter. And when she
yeah,
retired, not retired, when she did her last performance at the
yeah,
Met, it was Tosca. I happened to be at her very first performance many years before, and was
yeah.
blown away by her. And I had her, because you've been there, that I teach a class at New York University, and I had her one night during her last appearances at the Met, and she invited me to this rather wonderful party at her house full of Russian singers and Ukrainian singers. And the amount of delicious food, anyone who says the Russians don't eat
Um,
well, amazing food. And then there was a cake that was brought out to celebrate. It may have been her birthday as well. And the prop knife from the Met where Tosca kills Scarpia was
mm,
brought out to cut the cake. And she took the knife and stabbed it into the
that's
cake.
personality.
I've
Total
never asked an
personality.
artist about this because I respect privacy, and you can not talk about it if you want. There's a whole world of artists and people like me who work in the profession socializing at parties and gatherings, especially when we're on the road, where
Right.
we may see one another and have a community, but we're not with our own family or
Mhm.
whatever. And it's a very particular thing. Before uh, internet and email and so on, these gatherings were less frequent, or they were different. They were more subdued. Now we communicate that way. I remember Marilyn Horne was in Paris and we were communicating, and she had a fax machine in her hotel room, and we communicated by fax, handwritten. Jane Eaglin, I think, was the first artist to discover the internet and turn many other singers onto it, and people had to protect their voices. But it is a special world, the backstage life.
Yeah.
Would you talk about that in any way that moves you?
Um, if it was much more, I've never really been a, I've never really been a partier. Um, I had my moments in college, but, and very, very few and far between. I enjoy being social but, you know, uh, when I'm performing, I tend not to do too much of that unless it's something like Wagner. I don't know what it is about Wagner. Wagner makes people very social.
Yeah.
And the most going out to dinner with my colleagues has happened with me doing Wagner. I don't, maybe it was Seattle. Maybe it was being in Seattle. I don't know. It depends. When I got married, I got less social
Mm-hmm.
because I enjoy spending time with my husband.
Yep.
And but I'm much more social. I'm social online. I do have a fairly good online presence, and I enjoy that very much. But uh, I'm not super social. I don't like to. I like to go. There are a few people that I like to go out with. I have a good handful of friends that I enjoy being with when I'm in New York, and I'll go out to dinner with them and things like that. But other than that, I'm not too big on it.
I remember, I believe it was 2012, we were singing Amneris at the Met, and I ran into you in the building where Opera News Magazine is, by the
Mhm.
elevators. I don't know if you remember this. And I said, Stephanie, I want to ask you something. You said, I don't speak when I sing Amneris.
That was the truth. The
What?
only role,
Talk about what that means, because I didn't take it personally, obviously, but I figured, okay, but
it's the only
I
role.
thought it was vocal as opposed to emotional. But would you explain what you meant when you say I don't speak when I sing Amneris?
I don't. When I sang Omneris, which is the hardest role I've ever sung, not just vocally but emotionally, the most difficult role and the most rewarding. I didn't sing it a lot. I sang it in 3 different houses, and loved every moment of it. And if I could snap my fingers and sing one role flawlessly, it would be that one. That would be the one I would choose. But it took everything I had to do it. Everything. all of my vocal, all of my vocal abilities, my entire brain, everything. When I did that show, I just had to be focused like a laser, because there were just too many places where it could just go south, because it was written for 3 different singers.
Yeah.
It's written for 3 different women, honestly.
Explain that more for people who don't know what you mean.
It gets higher. Every single act gets higher. And it sits in some of the most precarious parts of your voice. So that parts of that, for me, parts of that role are like sitting on the edge of a knife. And that's part of the joy of doing it. You know, you for me, everything about that role was getting to the judgment scene. And not just getting there, but I mean, feeding every moment so that that was the most rich moment for the character. And there isn't anything written more exciting for mezzo-soprano than that role, and that's in that particular scene.
Not Emily?
I never sang.
Emily and Don Carlo, but I mean, in terms of your evaluation of more exciting.
I couldn't speak with any authority on that.
Okay. I have a question about actually the Met staging that looks like it's going to go away, but was there for many, many years.
Yes.
The Sonia Frizzell production,
Yes,
was monumental. I really like it and no complaints about it. But I remember when it was new in 88 or 89 and Dolores Zajic sang it, I believe she was the first Amneris and Aprile Milo. I didn't like the staging of the judgment scene because Zajic occasionally would sort of walk away. I mean, she was there and she was great, but then she would walk behind the setting. And I always wanted to ask her, were you getting water? What was the reason why? Probably because she would go behind and then come out again. And when you're watching Amneris on the stage, for her to vanish a few times, but the staging stuck even when she was not the Amneris.
It's a difficult production because it's so open.
Yeah.
There's nothing to it. I mean, it's all presentational. So you don't have, it's one of those pieces that just, there's nothing for you to sort of grab onto. And, you can hardly blame her. I mean, listen, I watched a production of the old production of Ballo with Luciano, and he would walk off stage and go have a sit and drink during a duet.
I know.
I mean, if you need something to drink and you're up there, and I'll tell you something, it is dry as dirt on that stage. And when you're talking about a set, especially working on that Frizzell set now, or working on the old, I mean, the old Falstaff set, that sucker came from the old Met.
Yeah.
And there's a lot
of early
stuff
1964
coming off of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff coming off.
Corelli in his costumes always had sponges in the sleeves and here. Sure. And he would squeeze it to get a little water. And Birgit Nielsen once hugged him and squished all the water out. And he became very angry because I preso la mia acqua, you've taken all my water.
I always during Orfeo, I didn't have any place to go off and have a drink, in the last scene, which was incredibly long. And I'd be standing up there on this set that was dry. And the misters at the Met haven't worked for years.
Yeah.
That missed which missed the stage in between acts, and they haven't worked for years. And so it is dry, it's all get out. And I would always have an unwrapped Ricola stuck in my bra.
Mm-hmm.
And while Danielle was singing, I just reach in and, pop it in my mouth and then spit it on the floor when I was done with it. Because there was nothing, you do what you have to.
True.
Because you don't, this doesn't get lubricated, yeah, you're done.
It's true. It's interesting you anticipated the next thing I was going to talk about was Orfeo, but just one more thing about the Aida production. I've directed a lot of opera and I've coached. Amneris happens to be a role I've coached a lot of singers in, and of all the Met productions and stagings, that's the scene that I've always thought I would like to be given the chance to restage it using the existing scenery. Because even artists as dynamic as Fiorenzo Cosotto looked weak in it. It was not them, it was not the singers, it was just the way the staging happened. And I know what you're saying about the water, but even if you have sort of a little Egyptian fountain and the singer can, flush herself the way in Cavalleria.
I'm interested in you. I'm interested in why you use the word weak. What do you mean weak?
Weak in terms of, I mean, not the performer, but the stage action that at the end of the judgment scene, many of the Amneris's walk off. You walked off with imperative, and you carried the emotion that you were expressing on the stage off the stage with you. Many of even the finest artists, after finishing her music, would turn and walk, and the orchestra, and you would just see the singer walk. You stayed in character and practically launched yourself off the stage,
because I really feel I've thought about that moment a great deal. And that is exactly what it has to feel like the scene is ending in motion. It can't feel like it's ending because it's actually entering another scene. So you have to feel like it's, like you're delivering something. And I always wanted it to feel like I was going to walk right off the stage. But it is a very complicated, that scene is a killer. It is a monster. And if you are not, I don't know how people delivered that role as sort of a bread and butter, because I only had as many as I had. It really is, it saps you of all of your energy. And this character is she goes on such a journey. And in the end, she's still selfish beyond belief. She really, really, loves this man. She really loves him, and would do anything to protect him and to keep him from his eventual fate. But in the end, she asks for peace, and I don't think she asks for them. I think she asks for herself. That's just
I thank you for that. I teach it differently, but I'm very open to your view on that. Thank you. I'll explain what I do when I teach it. Verdi, we know, composed it for Cairo, but it was not done in Cairo. Initially, they did Rigoletto. But then when it was done in Cairo, he did not go to Egypt. It was really the only opera production that was new that he was not present for the creation of the production. It was then done a little bit later in Milan at La Scala in 1872 with Teresa Stolz's Aida. And Verdi added a few more of those pieces at the word piece at the end of the opera rather than just pace a couple of times. And this was because the Italian Republic was newly formed and Verdi had a key role in it and already was coming apart.
Right.
And he wanted the Italian public to see the opera Aida as about how societies can come together and fall apart.
Right.
Too easily, as we see now in our times. And that, to me, the way I grasp it is that Amneris was not selfish, but came to a realization as a princess and as leader of Egypt that peace had to come first. Simone Boccanegra has that, and we see this throughout Verdi, that the ruler gains wisdom at the end because she is the princess of Egypt. And peace, Verdi, she says, pace imploro, I implore that we have peace. I think 8 times she says pace.
Yeah.
And Verdi added those paces so that the public would hear this, and that Amneris's word is actually the last one, not Aida, the title character, not Radames, but you get the last word.
Right.
Which to me was so important about that opera in terms of thinking about it. But I hear you about her selfishness. She was certainly selfish. I'm the princess. I should have the guy.
Well, and you know, someone who is certainly not used to not getting what she wants. You know, it always strikes me at the end that it is not something that she's searching for them, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And and I completely understand where the, you know, the historical context. I completely get it, but I don't have that historical context in my own life.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I'm looking at it from my particular study of the role and my ideas. Certainly, you know, I could read it. You can read it many ways and be completely truthful in all of them.
And this, listeners, is why we love this art form, because we can approach it with all seriousness and earnestness and arrive at the same moment with entirely other views. And they're both very persuasive. And we teach one another when we talk about these things.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, I want to get to Orfeo. In going down your list of many, 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 many roles at the Met, it struck me that unlike other artists in your vocal category, starting with Marilyn Horne, but not only, as Marilyn would say, you only played one boy. You have many of the Rossini characters. I saw you in Philadelphia play Tancredi, Rossini's Tancredi. But at the Met, at least, almost every character you played was a woman, with the exception of Gluck's Orfeo.
Right.
It was 2009. You were in it. Not everyone loves that production. I love that production. You may have a problem with the shape of it as a singer because it's so exposed. But would you talk about the production by Mark Morris and Isaac Mizrahi?
Sure. What I loved about this production is I adored having contact with dancers. I loved having contact with dancers and telling a story with them, and with them, through them, around them, and also that it gave me such unbelievable contact with the Met Chorus, who were, yes, in bleachers ahead, you know, above me for the entire show. But there was something about it that was so remarkable, and it, because of the nature of the piece and of the production, in that the chorus provided, you know, obviously is a Greek chorus, but also provided such layers of character because each one of them were playing a dead historical character.
Talk about that, because that to me was part of the genius of the production.
Yeah, I mean, you had everyone. You had Gandhi, and
in fact, I was going to say Gandhi because my late friend Michael played Gandhi.
Yeah. And the reason I mention it is because Michael and I were also friends, and I looked to him constantly during that production for strength, not because he was playing Gandhi, but because it was Michael, and he was so generous and wonderful.
Yeah.
But I love the Met Chorus. I have relationships with many of them, where many of them are friends, and also with many of the dancers. I've been friends with some of the dancers at the Met since the beginning of my career there, and they're some of the most important, special people in my life. Mm-hmm. when I'm in the theater, and being able to share this incredible moment with them was just amazing. I certainly never expected to be cast as Orfeo. Never.
It had been done, I forget whether before or after, by David Daniels. It's been played by men, it's been played by women.
Right. It was originally intended for Lorraine Hunt-Lieberson.
Yes.
And she passed away before that could happen. And then David did the first production of it, and I did it the second time, and it was for the HD, which was incredible. It was a great experience. One of the things that I would have loved to have thought of, in hindsight, I wish I'd worn a pair of black glasses. I really wish that I had thought to beat Roy Orbison.
Well, I
because I
was going to
think
ask you to talk about the costume, and I was going to say,
right.
was it Johnny Cash or Roy Orbison?
I know other singers think of him as Johnny Cash. I thought of him more as Roy Orbison because I've always thought that Roy Orbison would have been a great opera singer. Johnny Cash wasn't known for a great voice. He was known for a great voice.
Yes.
You know what I mean? He had, you understand what I'm saying? That wasn't a great singer. Orbison was a great singer, and I just always thought about him because the original intent was oh golly, I can't remember her name to save my life. There was another singer that was thought of when the original project was put together. And I loved the piece just because it had this beautiful ensemble feeling to it that was amazing. And it made me feel very special because as I said, I never thought that anyone would cast me in this role. It was casting against type.
Mm-hmm.
But I was very fortunate because both Mark and Maestro Levine wanted me for that part. And I'll always be grateful for that.
As I think you know, we know James Levine died recently in March. I worked there when he was sort of in a golden age of his work. Mm-hmm. And he recognized in me, I think the way Fracci and Abbado did, someone who would be a learner and then a transmitter. Mm-hmm. And he allowed me once every 2 months to come and sit with him for an hour in his office and ask any questions I wanted to about music.
Wow.
We covered Brahms songs, we covered everything. And when he was working on this show, this was well after I'd left the Met, but he still allowed me to come by every so often for an hour of sitting, because he said that I provoked thoughts in him that he appreciated. Mm. And I remember the formulation that he used about Orfeo. He said, "There is no better opera." And since we were talking at the very beginning, Stephanie, about language and how it could be used or not used, it always stuck in my head that he said there is no better opera.
Right.
It's the best opera, but that no opera is better. If I were to say that to you about Orfeo, how would you respond?
I don't, with all due respect to the maestro, I wouldn't, I don't know if I'd say that. Not that I don't love Orfeo, I do. I think it's a piece that what I love about the piece is that it's a multimedia piece. That there are lots of voices in it, including dance, that we don't necessarily see now. And I think that was very special to me, but I don't know if I would use those words.
It was my father's favorite opera for a simple reason. My father was a trombonist, and he evaluated the quality of an opera based on the trombone parts.
Oh, well.
He didn't love too much Verdi except for Otello and Falstaff, because that's what the good trombone parts were, but he loved Wagner and Strauss, and he loved Orfeo, and he loved certain Mozart. And I mean, he loved all music, but where there was something for him to play, those were the works that he really liked. So Richard Strauss was heaven for him.
Yeah, but I get it. But I also recognize the fact that Maestro Levine liked to use big language about pieces that he was working on in the moment.
Yeah, you're right.
You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
No, I mean, if he was working on it at the moment, it was the greatest.
I agree.
And I get that, because people ask me all the time, what's your favorite opera? And I always say what I'm working on at the moment.
Yeah.
But he could use very inflammatory language, positive inflammatory language about something. And he was the kind of person who could make a giant statement like that and not have anything to back it up.
True.
And you accepted it as gospel because he said it. Yeah. But, so you understand what I'm saying?
I do. But I also knew that there were works that he didn't necessarily love, like Salome. I don't think he had any feeling for. I don't know if he ever conducted it. He just didn't go near that opera, whereas he was a fantastic conductor of Electro, to pick a similar work.
Sure.
But not Salome. I can tell you that in my own opera going and my own formation as an opera guy, that Orfeo for me was incredibly important because I started going to opera when I was not quite 3. Not on my own, I was taken. But I was 11 when I saw Orfeo at the Met with Grace Bumbry. And somehow, for an 11-year-old,
yeah,
seeing this production, which was basically about behavior modification, don't look back. If you look back, everything falls apart.
That's right.
And the dramatic tension for the 11-year-old was, will this guy turn around and will everything fall apart or not? And we know the opera has 2 endings, so that Grace Bumbry looked back, she was Eurydice was lost, and that was it. I had the chance to talk to Grace Bumbry about that quite a few years later. And I told her what it meant to me to see that performance and how it was opera as drama for the first time. And I had seen Tosca and Carmen and other dramatic operas, but that was the one. And she said to me, "Do you remember my costume?" And I said, "I do. It was sort of silver boots and a silver outfit and a silver cape." She said, "I looked like Muhammad Ali about to enter the ring." She said it was the worst costume I've ever had. And so that prompts the question. You were talking before about the degree to which you as an artist have control or not control. Susan Graham once told me that the worst costume she ever had was this Meg Page and Falstaff, because the designer felt, let's be authentic and have rough British wool. And she said that the wool abraded her skin and it was very hot. You've played all kinds of characters with all kinds of costumes. We just mentioned the Roy Orbison look. To what degree have you been able, I'm going to pick one, the Fricka costume in Rheingold. How did that feel?
That is the ugliest prom dress ever made. I know. That is if you were to ask me what's the worst costume you've ever worn, that will be it. That is the worst costume ever.
I think I got it.
Yeah. The thing is, I'm really, really fortunate because I have people taking care of me at the Metropolitan Opera costume shop that are just world-class, generous, wonderful people. And I have, if a costume and if an original design is not great and doesn't work, not that it's not great, if it doesn't work for my particular body, then they'll take care of that. This particular costume wasn't, well, anyway, I don't want to go into huge Michigan.
No, but it was not even about singling out what apparently you and I recognize as having problematic costume.
Awful. But what people didn't recognize, people may not recognize, whenever I tell this story, people are always kind of shocked, that I was wearing under that costume 4 different batteries. So I had batteries for my mic, and when you wear a battery pack, you have to wear 2 because of redundancy. If one goes out, then you need the other. And so that was strapped around my waist. And then to my thighs were strapped 2 large batteries, about that, like that, for a little glowing light that sat in my décolleté that would glow for about a minute during one scene. And that was it. And my colleagues, even worse. The men were wearing battery packs on their backs, on their legs. It was heavy, it was hot. My favorite part of it was my dear friend, Joe Green, who was in charge of all of these batteries and stuff. Joe is no longer with us, sadly. Yeah. But Joe used to he would have to come into my dressing room, and I would stand there in all my underwear and my Spanx and my stockings and everything and my bra, and that was it. And he would have to strap all of the battery packs on me. And then then he would come back after my dress was put on, and he'd have to get under my skirt and turn me on every day. And it was just,
And he was a lovely guy. He really was. Yeah.
Joe was such a wonderful, generous person, because he recognized that this was a very vulnerable moment for me. And we would laugh hysterically every single time. And he, there were many times where I would be back there just wanting to throw something against the wall. I was so just, and he just calm, tell me a joke, and then turn me on. And then I go on and do the show. And having somebody like Joe, like the support staff at the Metropolitan Opera, who are the most remarkable people.
They are.
I have more friends and technical staff in that house than anywhere else. People that I've known since I was 23 years old, and who I've grown up with in that house, and then people that I've been introduced to along the way. Some of the most important people I've ever known, and who have gone out of their way to make me feel safe and to make me feel special and like I'm part of the family. I love them. And that was that's what got me through that ring cycle.
So what you just said raises the inevitable, and the inevitable meaning we can't avoid it, question. Why were you wearing batteries for microphones and so on in an opera production?
Because we wear mics all the time at the Met. We just don't wear them for amplification. We wear them for the HD. Because they cannot place microphones on the stage to pick up all the sound for the HD, live in HD productions. It's just not possible. And the first time I ever wore a microphone was actually in Orfeo. And I can tell you that when they told me where my battery pack went, I had 10 babies. I was just, well, but I understand why. And that's why it's not picked up. We don't wear microphones to be amplified into the house. It's simply for the recording.
I asked you that because I knew that, and I just want it out there in public, because I'm asked constantly.
No. It's very important to know.
People say,
I'm so sorry, but I'm having a dog emergency. My dog has to go out, and I need to take care of this. I'll be right back. I apologize.
Okay.
Just
I'll wing it. Go. Take June. Go ahead. Well, we lost the sound, but you go ahead.
The dog's got to go. You got to go.
Go.
Okay.
Take her.
Thank you.
So the next thing that I'm going to talk to Stephanie about, then I have to get going actually, is that she played in Stravinsky's Rake's Progress, the character of Baba the Turk. And it was in a cast that included Paul Groves, and before that, Jerry Hadley, I believe, and Dawn Upshaw and Samuel Ramey, and later the wonderful Gerald Finley and James Levine conducting a piece that he really loved. And Baba the Turk is a very particular character. What I can also say to you about Stephanie is that her range of roles, yes, she began by playing voices in operas such as The Tales of Hoffmann and Parsifal, but she also was Mother Marie in Carmelites, Dialogue of the Carmelites. She was in many party scenes in Die Fledermaus or The Merry Widow. Whenever they needed someone to enliven the party, Stephanie would come in and usually sing from a Broadway show, because we've been talking mostly about opera, but Stephanie is a terrific singer of jazz, of American popular songs. She is the best known interpreter of the Kate Smith songbook. And so she covers a range of music and styles of music, and not just because she puts her name on it, but she gets deep into the text and the style and makes it her own. She and I were once talking, and we discovered that among the things we have in common is our great admiration for Sammy Davis Jr., who had a beautiful voice, but she also felt that his diction is crystalline perfect, and he uses language better than just about anyone else, and that when she borrows from hello. So
Hello.
so what I was talking about, I'm going to talk to you about Baba the Turk. I spoke about your great range of roles, about our mutual regard for Sammy Davis Jr.
Yes.
and his diction and so on, and that you sing all kinds of music. And while we have been focusing mostly on opera and recital, I'm going to ask you first about Baba the Turk in one way,
Okay.
and then we're going to go in a different direction. And then I
Okay.
actually got to go. And I don't
Okay.
have a dog. I wish I did. But Baba the Turk, did you apply your own beard? Because you were talking about makeup and so on. Speak
Yes.
briefly about that character, and then we're going to go in another direction.
Well, I love singing Baba the Turk. I love the fact that I think the thing I'm most proud of ever is that I got to sing that role with a premier cast of it. To sing it with Dawn Upshaw, Jerry Hadley, and Sam Raimi was probably one of the most exciting things I've ever done. I'm working with Jerry was just heaven. And singing with Dawn was always heaven, and being in the presence of Sam Raimi is exquisite. And so that was quite something. It was
Being
a
in the
great.
presence of Sam Raimi is hell, but in the best sense, because he channels
Um,
the dark side better than anyone else.
he is one of the greatest colleagues I've ever worked with.
Yes.
And I sang a lot with Sam early on, and he just one of the most professional artists I've ever worked with. And I
And
learned a lot.
very funny.
Oh yeah, I learned a lot,
Yeah.
and I owe him a lot. And he not just that, but the second performance I did of that Baba the Turk of Breaks Progress, I actually came out to do my bow and fell on the stage. I tripped on my boa, as you do, and the whole audience, which I'm walking out to take my page bow, and it's the curtains open and everybody's there, and I tripped on my boa and landed on my knees, and the whole audience just went. There was this collective gasp, and I thought I was going to die. And there was Jerry Hadley and Sam Raimi that just came right out and picked me up, and boom, and I was just. What great memories. They're just amazing human beings. I'm so lucky to have sung with them, so lucky to sing with people like Jim Morris, and I mean just the most incredible artists. That was what
you were his fricka to his Votan, which is
twice, just in 2 shows.
I know, but still,
it was another great fall. That was a great fall. I actually the opening of the show that I did with him. Mm-hmm. We were in the middle of the argument. We're in the middle of the fight, and I tripped on the rock. And we didn't have a lot of rehearsal time on the set, and so I tripped on the rock, and I landed on my knees, and I looked up, and Jim looked at me, and he reached to help me up, and I went. And I wouldn't let him touch me. And adrenaline kicked in, and I don't even know how I got up. I have no idea, because it was the voluminous costume. And I was up on my feet in 2 seconds. And he told me afterwards, he said, "Steph, you scared the shit out of me," because I was like, you let me show a moment of vulnerability here. Mm-hmm. I meant to fall down. That was great. I love Jim so much. I have such an unbelievable respect and for him and his unbelievable career, and we've done some crazy stuff, and really enjoyed it enormously.
I had him on this program last summer, and I've for years, he's probably the artist I've most wanted to interview or converse with that I never had the chance to. It was such a pleasure, and I invite people, you can go to vimeo.com and search Fred Plotkin, James Morris, and you'll find that. It's so worth, for him, not me, but just what that man is and does is remarkable. So I'm transitioning, that's not the right word. I'm moving from Baba the Turk to Blythely Oratorio. Who is Blythely Oratorio?
It's Ortonio.
Ortonio, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's an honest mistake. Everyone makes it. I thought about it when we were creating his name, and I still liked Oratonio better. So, because I wanted it to be evocative of the tenor role, of a tenor name, and not Bach. What would you like to know about him?
How was he created? Why was he created?
He was created originally for a fundraising concert for Philadelphia Opera.
Which
I was singing Mahler. I was singing Mahler 8 with the Philadelphia Orchestra, and my friend Dito van Rijgersburg came back to see me. Now, I had never met Dito at the time, and Dito is a really phenomenal actor and brilliant drag artist whose alter ego is Martha Graham Cracker. And Dito had brought a wonderful artist named John Jarbo, and director, who is the director of the Bearded Ladies Cabaret in Philadelphia. And we were just talking, and I had known of Dito for a very long time because his parents, Stephanie and Fernando van Rijgersburg, were my host parents when I was at Wolf Trap for 2 summers. And they're like parents to me. And so here I was meeting, my brother. And I turned to David Devan, who is the general director of Philadelphia Opera. And I said, I'd love to do a concert to benefit Philadelphia Opera with Martha Graham Cracker. Can you make that happen? And David said, yes, I think I can.
David is
and we
wonderful.
Decided, David is magnificent. And almost a year to the date, we did it. And I met with Dito and with John and with our music director, Daniel Kazemi. And we just started, pitching ideas over the phone. And I talked about wanting to create an alter ego for myself, to have a drag character. And I thought, if I'm ever going to do it, this is the time, and these are the folks that are going to help me. And we created Blithely. He was created in the basement of his bio says he was born in the basement of an Episcopalian church in Philadelphia. And that is in the Beard Cave. Yeah. And
wonderful thing about, I'm sorry to interrupt, about this, I'm going to call him a character unless you want me to call him something else.
You can, he's whatever, he's whatever you want.
Is that in addition to giving you all kinds of music to sing that Stephanie Blythe would not be singing in formal context, it gives you an even greater range of character expression and political communication and societal observation, in a bit the way that Barry Humphries, who famously plays Dame Edna, I knew Barry Humphries when he was in the show Oliver on Broadway as a man, as Mr. Bumble. And because I'm not that old, but I go way back in performing. So, and he only later created Dame Edna, and Dame Edna can say things that Barry Humphries cannot or does not.
Right.
They're very pointed and very, very perceptive. And are you evolving blithely in that direction as you play him more? Yeah.
Oh no, he started out that way, and he's more that way now. We had a Lincoln Center debut. In fact, my last live concert before the pandemic shut everything down was in the Appel Room at Jazz at Lincoln Center, doing my show, Blithely Ever After. And that show is a commentary on a lot, mostly on what it's like to be a 50-year-old woman singing in opera. Mm-hmm. A 50-year-old woman, a 50-year-old menopausal overweight woman singing in opera. And he is able to say things that I don't generally say in public, although I do say a heck of a lot more on Twitter. But I love him because he's always been there. Since I was a child, he's been there. And now he just has a voice. And, the older I get, the more my voice has changed. you know, and I will say that there's an aspect of gender fluidity in my instrument that I am very happy to embrace. And I'm very fortunate that there are people out there who are interested in that journey with me. And I love singing as a man. I love it.
That's why I remarked that I found it surprising and unusual. I would have expected to have seen in your list of opera repertory more male roles the way other mezzos and contraltos have done.
Yeah, but those are pants roles. I'm talking about singing male roles, not roles that were written for women to sing as men. I'm talking about roles that were written for men to be singing them. Because I do think that there are some very interesting scholarly writing happening now about the idea that vocal folds don't have a gender. And the older I get, and the way my hormonal development has happened, I have a C below middle C.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I had a top C when I was young. I haven't had a top C for a while now. And I don't need to apologize for the fact that my voice has changed, but it does open me up to some really interesting repertoire, which I have some people who are interested in, as I said, in exploring that with me, like San Diego Opera, who've cast me as their next Johnny Skiki.
I love it.
So
now it's topsy-turvy.
Now it's a little topsy-turvy, but it's all me.
I mean, topsy-turvy.
Yes, I get it. It's very clever, Fred. But it's all me, whether or not I'm singing as Stephanie or whether I'm singing as Blythely, it's all me.
Yep.
There are aspects of my personality and aspects of myself as an artist that I can express in this way, and that I'm being given the opportunity to do that. I'm very grateful for that.
And we are too. So I'm not a singer, but the one role in opera that I always thought that I could play is Buoso Donati, who's the corpse in Johnny Skiki. Can I be your Buoso?
Listen, anytime. Anytime. Skiki was the very first opera I ever sang in when I was in college. And I've sung that, I've sung in that show many, many times with some amazing Skikis.
Yeah.
My favorite being, Corbelli, who was, Alessandro, who's just a genius. And there's something really wonderful about that character that I'm very, very excited to explore.
Very important to get the Tuscan inflection that Corbelli has.
Of course.
It's essential to the role. Tito Gobi had it, even though he was not a Tuscan. Without it, the musicality is in that as much as the music, it's in that inflection. So 2 more things, Stephanie, because I know you and I could do this for a long time, but I have stuff that I have to do. I just want to tell listeners that you're a fabulous photographer, and that if people only saw your photographs and had no idea what else you do, they would think that you are a world-class photographer. I once mentioned to you a number of years ago, but it never came to pass, that there's a wonderful photography festival in, I think it's Kristiansand, Norway, where they also have a beautiful concert hall where I've spoken and performed in that concert hall. And I think they'd be very wise to have you do a photo exhibition and performance. So I'm just putting that out there in the ether to our Norwegian friends. And finally, Stephanie, you are a master of playing the ukulele.
I am not a master. I am a happy amateur.
Okay, a happy amateur who has made a lot of people happy, especially during the pandemic, when you release videos with songs. How did the ukulele find you, and you the ukulele, and do you have a preferred ukulele?
I do have, I found the ukulele. My first ukulele was given to me by Craig Terry, who's my collaborator and music director that I worked with on my Kate Smith cabaret show. And I had said to him, a lot of these Tin Pan Alley songs were written on the ukulele. I should learn to play at least one of them on the ukulele. And so opening night, 2011, he gave me my first ukulele, which was a lovely little soprano ukulele. And I thought, well, with these meat hooks, how am I going to play that? And I didn't really pick it up for a couple of years. And then I brought it with me to Tanglewood. And I thought one summer when I was working, I thought, well, I have a little extra time here. I'll learn how to play a song. And I promptly broke my G string, which you do.
On the ukulele.
And as you do on the ukulele. And so, exactly. And so, boy, was that, anyway, we could just go forever. But I ended up going on to Amazon and buying a tenor ukulele because I thought, well, this will be larger and easier for me to play. Now, of course, I realize I can play any size of ukulele, it doesn't matter. But consequently, I have been purchasing ukuleles ever since, probably since 2012. I've got 14 or 15 ukuleles now. Last summer, I was contacted by Lonnie Kai Ukuleles because I play a beautiful concert ukulele in a lot of my concerts, and beautiful quilted maple concert. And concert referring to the size. So you've got soprano, concert, tenor, baritone, and there's also a bass ukulele. And so I was contacted by Lonnie Kai, and they said, you know, the representative said, we noticed in one of these videos we saw you play that you play Lonnie Kai. Are you interested in becoming a Lonnie Kai artist? It's like, yes. And so that is when I was given my favorite ukulele. This is also a quilted maple, but it's stained blue. It's a tenor ukulele. And this is my preferred ukulele because it's got a built-in tuner and it's got a jack for a speaker if you want it. But I love this ukulele because it maintains a beautiful pitch and it's got a great sound and it looks pretty. And what I love about the ukulele is that I never learned to play the piano. And the instruments that I did play were flute and baritone saxophone, which are very difficult to accompany yourself on a song. And so when I started playing this instrument, all of a sudden I was playing and singing at home in a capacity other than learning music. And singing for fun is a very different thing than singing for work. Mm-hmm. And informs a different side of you as an artist and as a human being, you know, being creative in that way. And so I just started playing and really enjoying it. And I had made several videos playing some of my favorite songs over the years. But when the pandemic happened, I just started doing it on a larger basis. And now I actually perform. I do concerts with a wonderful promotional group called ourconcerts.live. Our next concert's coming up on June 17th. I'll be doing one every month this summer. Mm-hmm. And I play both as myself, as Stephanie, and Blythe also makes some wonderful, our next concert actually stars Blythe, which will be a lot of fun. But now I get to do these concerts in a more formal way online, and that's really great. But there's still times where I just sign on to Facebook, and my last concert was like an hour and a half long, just sitting and playing songs. It's my musical Prozac.
I would also say that sometimes there are 3 or 4 minute songs that you put out into the world on your ukulele, seated on that couch or another couch, that are very of the moment, and whatever it is that has captured your thoughts, and you find the appropriate song and words to express them. How would people search them on the internet? Because I live for them. Not only for them, but
I put them. You can find them all on Instagram. I put everything on my public Facebook page. You can find all of them on my public Facebook page, my private Facebook page, but because they go public on Instagram and Twitter now. I put them on Twitter. And I'm toying with the idea of having a YouTube channel, and from all of this summer too, I started writing my own songs. Mm-hmm. And that's been really that's been an enormous amount of fun.
I think for you, it would have to be called a YouTube channel.
Again, very clever, Fred.
Stephanie, I love you. I have to go. Thank you for I began with the word inspiration. I think now listeners have discovered some of what is so inspiring. We've only scratched the surface, but keep up the good work. Keep
I'll do my
evolving, the
best.
word I used. You are. And as I said at the very beginning, and I meant it, you are getting better and better. And that's
Thank
a
you,
wonderful
Fred.
thing
Thank you
to
so
be
much.
present for. So thank
Thank
you.
you for a great conversation.
Thank you as always. Take care.